Yeah.
Well, let's dive in from that aspect then, because I think one of the kind of key components of what InvGate does and why we do it really has really circles around user adoption, and a lot of that even starts with the login scenarios that users can be tied to. So, for example, you'll see one example here already, log in with Office 365. But we do have built-in single sign-on and user authentication capabilities with, obviously, Office 365. We can do LDAP and AD and Azure AD. We can do Google authentications. We can even do SAML-based authentications if they want to do some third-party authentications. That's not a problem either. But the idea here, from a single sign-on component in particular, but even if I just log in as a regular end user, the idea here is that people are utilizing existing credentials, or they're able to bypass the login process completely when single sign-on is enabled. That's really the first real key component there with user adoption, because it's not very hard for them to do that. The other elements there too, just worth noting real quick, we do also offer seamless email to ticket integrations. So people can email the service desk. They can email any number of incoming mail accounts. We'll monitor all of those. We check them every 60 seconds, and we can convert those emails into new requests as well. We can parse the emails. We can look for keywords and phrases and things like that, do some advanced routing after they come in. There's a lot of nice benefits there as well. But again, the idea there is user adoption. There's always going to be some percentage of users. Hopefully it's a single digit percentage, but there's always going to be some group of users that just prefers to send an email or phone in or something like that. That's okay. We would still accommodate those scenarios. But hopefully those users are going to get into the habit of utilizing the self-service portal. And there's a lot of benefits when they get into self-service portal. And it's not just the end user that benefits from self-service. So we'll talk a little bit about that kind of initially here before we dig into the technician side of things. But a couple of things to mention as we kind of stare at the home screen here. We can see a lot of information being presented to us. The organization actually has quite a bit of flexibility in terms of what they show and what they don't show to the end users. And they can even get kind of surgical there in terms of which users see things and which ones don't. For example, I see this big red banner here about a system outage. I actually have like 9 messages in my demo environment. But Emma, in this case, just sees this one. Now, that could be based on things like her Active Directory groups or her role at the organization, the departments that she's in, things of that nature can really dictate a lot of that. And that same kind of capability to surgically, figure what people can see and what they can't would also apply to things like the knowledge-based material. So if there's articles that are, for example, just internal only for the IT teams, that's fine. You guys can kind of cordon those off from the rest of user groups. That's not a problem at all. It would even hold true for things like the service catalog. So if I come in here to make a request, I can see here's all the categories I have in my demo environment. And obviously I've got this set up as kind of a multi-department service desk. So kind of a single pane of glass that the whole organization can use for any kind of request for service, not just IT. But again, the idea here is, there could be items in the catalog that maybe are not visible to the end users. Or, for example, if I come in here and start making some, subtype categories and things like that, we actually allow our customers to have as many layers to the service catalog as they might need. And in this case, maybe there's 10 layers to the service catalog under facilities request. But for good user adoption, we're only showing maybe the first 2 or 3 layers to the end users because we don't want to scare them into picking up the phone. That's a bad outcome, right? So that's kind of the idea there. We do have a built-in search capacity here as well, which is kind of cool. So for example, maybe I just know I have a toner issue. I don't know where that's nested in the catalog. It's showing me that here, but this is kind of nice. I can click on that and now it pre-selects those values for me. So that's really beneficial, in particular in the beginning, because again, people are not always familiar with where these things live inside the catalog. So in this case, I can continue. Now, obviously, for kind of a pedestrian kind of a toner issue here, the fields that I've put into the form are pretty pretty obvious, right? We'll look at another use case in a moment that's going to have different fields, obviously, but that's kind of the idea here. There's some prerequisites that I have in place for this user. For example, they need to tell me what building they're in today. Now, this is just a custom field that I added to our environment here. You might notice there's no priority field showing. That's very much on purpose. There is a priority field in the system, but I have hidden it from end users, and it's only visible to certain users in the system. So instead, what I've done is I've built in the impact and the urgency rule. So each of these would have a weighted value, and based on what the user is selecting here, we add them together in the background. That can determine the priority. Or we could do it based on the nature of the service. There's a dozen different ways to determine priority. This is just one of them. But the thing here is don't show that to the customer, because you know what they're going to pick every time, right? So I can see here too. Now, normally this description area, this would just be kind of like a free form text field, really almost like glorified email at that point. In this case, what I did is I'm kind of leading the horse to water a little bit. I do have some specific things that I need the user to tell me, like where the printer is located. I might need to know that in case I'm going over there, right? So it's behind the conference room. That's good to know. Maybe I do need to know if it's making noises, because maybe I'm bringing like a toolkit with me or something like that, right? I can also see here the kinds of cartridges that we might need. Certainly I'm going to want that, because if I can help it, I'm only taking one trip. This is not something I want to spend too much of my day with, if I can manage, right? And then also, who's paying for it, right? Because these things aren't free. So I could say, yeah, it's engineering team, something like that, right? Now, again, these are just examples, drop-down menus, checkboxes, date fields, currency fields, all that different type of stuff would go into the different types of custom fields and different kinds of templates that we can build in. Really, there's no problem there. Here's kind of our first nod to the asset management as well. In this case, Emma doesn't have any devices already associated with her, but that's okay. She can look up like an Epson printer or something like that. I've got a few in here, I think, in my demo environment. Yeah, there we go. So maybe it's this one here. She can now link that to the request. If she had devices associated with her already, she would see those here too. We'll look at that in a little bit later. We'll look at a different user that has some devices tied to their profile. So we can look at that as well. But again, that's the idea. Sometimes it's not something that you own or something that you use every day. So you do need that search capability. It is there. This is kind of cool too. I'll cheat a little bit because I know the keyword that will fire off the behavior I want to show. But this is kind of nice. We do have a phrase matching capability in here. And again, this is particularly helpful in the beginning. Now, hopefully the user would go to the knowledge base first before they create a ticket. But we know, as people are kind of getting used to things, that might be unlikely. So we do have some safety nets like this built into the solution. So here we can see, something about a brother, toner change, 476 requests. That sounds interesting. That could be a winner. So now we can look at this. This is really nice. This is a YouTube video. It's third-party, royalty-free content. I just copied and pasted a little embed code and put it into our knowledge base article. I've got links to external websites or documents. I've got a list of steps to try. I've pasted images in line. Really, the idea here would be, let's make this kind of as foolproof as possible, right? Really, really help the user by showing them all the things that they could potentially need. So if they wanted to do the self-service, they could. Now, she may tell us, I have an Epson printer, right? So this doesn't help me. I want to go back to my request. But let's say, for grins, yeah, this actually solves my request. She would click the green button. That's green for a reason, right? She gets the check mark there. That's always a nice thing to see. Gets kind of her digital high five. And it would send her back to the home screen. Now, that's ideal for a number of reasons. First of which, the user has everything they need. They're not waiting for somebody to get back to them. They don't have any back and forth with the technician, taking, hours and hours and hours of back and forth delays to get that thing resolved. It's just done, and Emma can move on with her day. She's a happy camper. Second person that's probably really pleased about that is the technician who would have had to do that work that came in on that ticket because, the queue is not getting any smaller. We totally understand that. So the more of these things that we can automate and kind of get out of the hands the low-level type requests like that, the low-hanging fruit, the technicians are definitely going to benefit because then they can spend their time on things that maybe have a bit more of an impact to the organization. And then thirdly, really the organization should be happy because the knowledge base did its trick. We've invested some time, we've invested some of our own internal knowledge sharing. So we want to make sure that there's, a payback on that investment. So in this case, I could see that article, in this case, has 477 requests now. A moment ago, it was 476. So even though technically the request didn't get created, we're still going to count that as a successful interaction with the material. We think that's an important kind of behavior to track in the system. And in this case, too, Terry wrote the article, so he just scored points in our gamification system because we have some weighted point values in gamification for people that are kind of doing God's work there and helping us out with getting knowledge-based material into the system. And not just any material, but effective material, right? So again, there's a lot of winners when we do self-service correctly. Certainly the end user is going to be happier. You're going to have better adoption rates. You're certainly going to have faster resolution times with things that come in this way, where you're getting all of that data that you needed in the form right away. There's no backup phone call or email outreach to find out what floor they're on today or something like that. We got all that stuff early. So again, there's a lot of different winners in those different scenarios. Now, if I were to change out the request type, just for grins again, let's do kind of a traditional service desk versus just an IT help desk. This is a good time of year for this, actually. Somebody wants to take some time off or something. Well, yeah, that form is probably going to look pretty different than it would for some IT-related requests. So in this case, we need to know what kind of projects you're working on and how many days you're taking from your PTO and maybe who your manager is. This is kind of redundant, too, if you're doing Active Directory, because we can actually track the manager from AD. So that's kind of nice. We can autofill that already. And then, yeah, obviously, when are you leaving? When are you coming back? I'm taking some time off myself, most of this week. There we go. So I could say, yeah, I'm taking that time off, vacation request, and now I don't have a little form to fill out. I could just do my free form text, justification for how I want to do this stuff. So like I said, you can really, associate any nature of request with the system. There's really no limitations there. The only other quick things to note in terms of the end user interface, you might notice here, there is the ability to do approvals from the portal. One really nice benefit of our solution is that it does not consume a license to be an approver in any of the approval processes. So that can really save quite a bit of coin. We also allow you to vote from emails. So they don't necessarily have to come into the portal, but certainly if they wanted to, they could. But they can accept or reject right from here. They can dig in to the request, take maybe a deeper look at it before deciding whether they want to proceed with the approval or reject it, whatever the case might be. But again, that does not consume a license. Any user in the system can be an approver. But that is pretty much the gist of the self-service portal. Any questions, any other scenarios we might want to take a look at here before we change gears and go over to the technician/administrator side of the house?
I've got a question about the dashboard. How does the dashboard look like? And is that for clients? So the clients have like a dashboard view of their ticket. Is that right?
So the dashboards is actually a feature that you can turn on or off for specific users. So in this case, yeah. Emma is one of my more power-oriented users. So she has access to the dashboards. What's visible on those dashboards is actually up to the administration team in the system. They can pick and choose which areas are visible, which ones aren't. In this case, too, for example, the work in progress dashboard in its settings actually shows things across many different departments, but Emma doesn't have visibility into all of those departments. So in the dashboard, she only sees the things she's visible, has visibility settings to. We'll look at that more from the technician side when we set it up. But again, it does not consume a license to be able to see dashboards or even those scheduled reports in the system that get emailed. That's okay as well. That does not consume a license to be an audience member on those.
Yeah, because I think some managers, they don't really particularly use the service desk, but they want to view the tickets you know, the tickets that are raised on their location or something.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
I think
exactly
that,
what this would be for. Yeah, and we can also
yeah,
do, we could set observe rights. So here I have got the observe tab for Nancy. I'm sorry, for
yeah,
Emma. So here's the groups that she has visibility into. She can see all those requests. Like here's one. Actually, it looks like I'm the user on that one, Shiraz there, for checking the AC filter. She can see that because I'm in the same department as her, or whatever
yeah.
that setting was in the background.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, if I log in as a different user real quick, you'll notice that the portal will look a little different, and that's very much by design. So if I log in here as Daniela, as the example, so here you can see at the top, she doesn't have the dashboards and she doesn't have the observed tab because I haven't granted her those rights. And then also you might notice here, the message is different. She's
Yeah, I
got
was gonna say,
something about a planned weekly outage on Monday. This one's different than the one that Emma saw because again, she's in different groups or different buildings or different departments or something like that. Make sense?
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect. Any other scenarios we want to talk about with self-service before we switch gears?
And I think that's it for me.
All right.
No, that's fine, Shiraz.
Yeah, I'm good.
Fair enough. So I'll log out here from Daniela. And let's go in now as Terry. He's got admin rights in here, so we can start looking under the hood a little bit. And in this case, actually, why don't we dive right into dashboards, since we're already kind of talking about that. And you'll already notice here, Terry sees stuff here for DevOps. He sees HR. And Emma Miller did not see that stuff because, again, she doesn't have visibility to that, where Terry does. Now, the idea with the dashboards, we do give a handful of dashboards, these green ones here, backlog view, SLAs, customer satisfaction, things like that just come with the solution right out of the box. So there's no, configuration really necessary for those. But creating custom dashboards is pretty darn simple as well. So here I can see the one that I created for Terry here has, 5 or 6 different charts on there. This one, obviously, we already kind of looked at. You dig into it, and you see how those tickets are arrayed across my different technicians, right? Pretty obvious. But basically, all the configuration is done right here. I just go into edit mode on this. I pull up the configuration on that specific chart, and this is where I built it out. So obviously, it's a column chart, right? But they know their audience better than we ever will. Maybe that particular person or people, they like to see that as a pie chart or a bar chart or whatever. Again, a lot of different visualization options depending on what they prefer. The measures here, I just said, show me the number of requests that meet the conditions. But based on what that organization potentially measures as a win or a loss, there's 40 or 50 different measure points we have in the solution. Yeah, and a lot of them around SLAs and time adherences and how many times things are changing hands and things like that. All those different interaction points we track. These, it's worth noting, by the way, all these measure points you see in here, these are the same ones we offer in the reports area. So there is a lot of overlap there between kind of the metrics that we measure with the system. The difference with dashboards is this is something that refreshes every 5 minutes. So it's always kind of like a finger on the pulse type of a report, where in the reports area, which we'll look at later, that's for the scheduled things that maybe you want to take a look at, quarterly trends or weekly trends or something like that. You don't necessarily need to just see a snapshot every couple of minutes. So again, they utilize the same data points, but they can tell a very different story based on how they're configured. And then in this instance too, the dimension and the drill down was just supplied from the fields in the solution. So even the custom fields that are added like 6 months later, it doesn't matter. We can utilize any of that stuff for our dimension and drill down, or also for the rules. So you might notice here, I have a little caveat that I put on here. In order for the ticket count to show up properly in the bar, the ticket has to meet certain conditions. In this case, I kept it kind of vanilla. I just need it to be in progress, right? So I don't need it to be closed or canceled or whatever. That's just going to screw up my numbers. So just show me the things that are work in progress, right? That's the idea there. Now, again, depending on their needs, maybe it's got to meet these 3 specific conditions or these other 2 conditions. I mean, this really kind of boils down to how ambitious people are feeling when it comes to creating reports. We always say in the beginning, keep it more basic, keep it a little more kind of low level, kind of it's okay to kind of just hover above everything and see how things are going. Then as some of the systemic challenges start to be addressed and things can get more efficient and you start building in more automations, you'll realize that maybe some of the original dashboards that you've built or the original reports that you're running, maybe they're obsolete, maybe they're not as effective anymore. So the ability to quickly create new ones, again, there's a reason we make that a very easy process inside the portal. We know that needs change and goalposts move and all that good stuff as people kind of go through their life cycle of utilizing these solutions. So again, that's how we would set up our dashboards. And then sharing them is pretty darn easy as well. Just go to the dashboard in question. It's this one here. And then this is the share button. So you click on that. And now it lets you pick who are the users. And again, these might be populated from AD or Office 365 or Gmail or something like that. That's fine. But the idea is I have those users in my system. Here are 4 that have been granted visibility to that dashboard. We logged in earlier as Daniela, right? She did not have access. If I wanted her to, I could. It's just as easy as picking her from the list, right? So very, very simple solution to that challenge. But yeah, that's dashboards. Any questions about any of that?
No, I think I'm good.
No. One thing I really like about this dashboard view is you can also download it as a PDF file.
You can.
In case you want to email that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think even Jason in his past life as a help desk manager, he used to have stuff like this up on a monitor or up on a TV that everybody could kind of see, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I used to do that, and then even just the list views I used to put up on TVs, and if something met the conditions and popped up on the list, we had to be proactive and reach out to the customer, et cetera, those kinds of things.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. If you want to put it on a separate monitor, do you need a license for that, or do you need an agent logged in all the time? How do you do
I would
that?
just use, we have like a super admin account that comes with the system. Yeah, it's a great utilization of that account because it sits there unused, or we tell people just rename it to somebody else or something like that. If you don't want to pay for the extra license, rename it to somebody. But the idea there, again, just have an account that has the appropriate permissions logged into the portal, and you should be good to go.
Okay.
And like we said, an end user can see those reports as well. So I mean, you could even have some dummy reports end user account or something. There's many different ways to make that work.
Yeah. Okie dokie.
Perfect. Well, let's just kind of move from top to bottom. I think that'll probably be easiest. It kind of goes through a lot of the different elements here. So this is one of my favorites, actually. This My Work area consolidates a whole bunch of information into one kind of centralized queue for the technician or administrator at hand. Now, the idea here is we want to keep users from having to have multiple screens or 18 different tabs open in Chrome or something like that. It's really not tenable. It's not super efficient. It's always, hard to keep up with things, right? So what we've tried to do here is consolidate everything into a view that makes sense. It's built with a logical approach. So we'll go through that. First of all, you'll notice even the color coding, for example. I have 3 items that are waiting for me. Those are red, right? And here they are. You can see it's waiting on the agent, waiting on the agent, waiting on the agent. That makes sense. Now, in total, I have 11 items that are open that are assigned to me. That's orange. That's a little bit lower priority, right? Now, some of these are waiting on the customer, or I sent something back to Apple to get fixed, it looks like, or we're waiting for a date, or here, we tied it to our Jira bug tracker in case there's some issue there, so I want to pause the clock on those, right? So that's the idea. And I've got things maybe I need to approve. Tasks that have been assigned to me. Doesn't look like there's any there. That's good. In this case, I'm a manager that can do manual assignments, so I even have a tab in there for that. Maybe 8, it looks like there, have come in that have been updated recently. That's a safe guess, right? So the idea here is we can move from left to right, from top to bottom, just like we would read the newspaper, right? It's the same idea here. Waiting for me is the things I need to address right now. Here I can see those. Now I can change their status from here, kind of like this dashboard type view. Or if I want to dive into it, that's okay as well. I can click on the request in question. And again, now I can start to dig into it and start to work on that request or look at the various details of it. This one looks like a training request there. So I can do that very, very easily. Or again, I can change the status or whatever the case might be. Let me pull up one ticket here that's got a bunch of demo data on it. It is worth noting, by the way, I guess I should have mentioned this kind of in the beginning. We are pink verified for a number of ITIL processes, including problem management, you can see that here, but also incident management, request fulfillment, or service fulfillment, I should say, and change management. We are pink verified on all of those. So we don't require people to do the full, pink oriented and ITIL oriented services. That's okay. They can still utilize their own kind of unique policies and processes there. But for people that do want to stick to the book and things like that, that's okay as well. We can assist in that configuration. We have a configuration guide for it to make sure that everything is by the book, so to speak. But in this case, I'm going to open up this problem request, and we can take kind of a deeper look here at some of the tasks I've got associated and things like that. So in this case, looks like it's closed. Let me reopen it real quick, just so I can do the full editing on it and things like that I want to do. But in this case, I've got a request here about a file server being down. It was urgent. I can see, looks like we did good on our first response time. Looks like we did not meet our goal on the expiration date on the resolution time there. We'll go into SLAs in a little bit as well, but a lot of capabilities there. Now, in this instance, Nancy is the affected customer. James is the agent that was assigned to it. And I've got a lot of impacted users that I've added onto this thing. These might be users from the linked incidents. So for example, if I come down here to the relations area, these are the linked incidents that have been associated with the problem. Now, one of the benefits there is, this is kind of cool, the solution, if I were to solve the problem ticket, click that button there, and you'll notice the color code's kind of is green, which is nifty. That solution will auto-inject into all of the linked incidents. So I don't have to copy and paste that thing 24 times by the looks of it on this one. And then again, all of these affected users would now be notified about the solution. So that can be a big time saver. We can also, by the way, at any point go in and create tasks. So in this case I did, because this is a problem ticket. Looks like it had maybe some other moving parts that were associated with it. So I needed some other hands to help out. So I needed, for example, it looks like John Thomas there. I needed him to go grab a spare part from the warehouse. Terry here had to put in a closure code, right? So that's the idea. You can create really as many tasks as you want. You can delegate those to any other technician in the system. Those technicians can then do the work right on this request, or maybe they need to create a new request. Like here I see Terry has been tasked with kicking off an advisory board, change advisory board request. So he's probably going to do that in a separate request that links back to his original request. So he can search the system to find an existing request that he wants to link, or he can just go in and now create a new one, and maybe it's something like that cab request, right? So we can make sure that is now anchored back to the original one. And this one might have its own set of fields and its own set of requirements and things like that as well. So that's kind of the idea there. So let's go back to ticket 480. In these requests as well, we can associate them with even with external entities. So I think we looked at one where I sent it back to Apple, for example. That's one of my external providers that I've got listed in my demo environment. HP is another one. Jira, we saw that one earlier too, right? So that's kind of the idea there as well. Or again, maybe I'm just waiting for a date. I'm waiting for a part to come in. And according to FedEx or whatever, it's going to be here on Monday. So I know that. Now I can pause the clock potentially. Now, and by the way, that's a judgment call. Customers can pick and choose when the SLA clocks are paused or running. There's various statuses that they can select for that. In this environment, we're pretty liberal. We only count it against the agent if it's in the hands of the agent. If it's in any of those other statuses that we were looking at up there, the clock isn't running. But again, that's a judgment call based more on the policy and practices of the customer than it would be on us. So pretty straightforward there. We can put in reminders for ourselves as well, which can certainly help. Again, if you've got it, with an external provider, maybe you need to check with your account rep next week, make sure everything is on pace, or check the tracking code or something if you're waiting for the shipment to come in. Again, a lot of different scenarios there we can associate. Approvals is a big element within our solution. We can do approvals in a number of different ways. We could do them as part of like really grand workflow scenarios, like an advisory board that we looked at a second ago. We'll look at that one a little bit more under the hood later. But sometimes you just have kind of a predefined process that things need to follow. That's fine. You can build out really as many approval processes as you want, and then select it here from the list once it's been created. Or sometimes you just need kind of that ad hoc approval, that thumbs up, thumbs down kind of a thing. Maybe Emma Miller, our end user from earlier, maybe she's, again, kind of an operations person or whatever, and I could just say, hey, can you look at this and accept or reject, right? So now she would get that request by email. She could be notified from email. She can do it right from there from email, or she can come into the portal the way we did earlier and start to review those things from there. But all pretty straightforward. We can always see who's approved, who's rejected, and who we're still waiting on. So in this case, we're just waiting on one person, right? But if you have a board-based decision, maybe it's a democratic percentage or a unanimous percentage or last right of refusal or something like that, depending on how the process is structured. Again, we can show full visibility on what's going on with all of that, so that people aren't blowing up the phone lines to the technicians every 5 minutes asking for status updates. It's all visible and really obvious, really, in the request itself. Okay. We can reassign it from here. That's pretty easy to do as well. Now we have a bunch of different auto routing mechanisms and things like that, so that reassignments can be almost there as a last resort. I mean, you really shouldn't be reassigning something unless it's changed its nature, or something was just input incorrectly, right? But a lot of the times, the way that we set up the auto routing should really cover the blanket of assignments if things are set up properly. We can associate work time with the request, and the categories would be customizable. So what you see here for my work time categories, this is just what I have here in my demo environment. You can associate billing rates with certain categories if you want to as well, so that time can be billed. It's not a problem, and all that stuff is reportable, by the way. And then we've got our actions menu, so we can edit, solve, escalate, merge. We can create a new request and link it back to this one. We can duplicate this request, or we can reject this request, which is kind of like deleting it. That's kind of the idea there. And then from a working standpoint, we can put in our notes. We can have public notes. We can also have internal notes. You'll notice those ones color code almost like a sticky note, like a Post-it note there, right? A nice little rich text editor if we wanted to have something there that maybe is highly technical, or a snippet of code that we want to share with the other techs that would scare the bejesus out of an end user if they saw it. So maybe we just make that one internal. That's fine. We can do file attachments or paste images into the selection there. Or we can also do canned responses. This is kind of nice. Like I don't know, this one I think I just put in there as a real basic one, yeah. But that's the idea. You can build out canned responses. You can have them individual just for yourself. You can have canned responses that are team-oriented or more globally created by the administration in the system. A lot of different options there, again, to account for all the different types of use cases that we can think of with how people use this stuff. And in this case, I just see the dialogue, but I can actually go here and show the full history. If I really wanted to get into the weeds on the audit trail, and all this stuff, by the way, is in the logs, and it can all be reported. But sometimes an auditor just wants to see, the life and times of one request. They can certainly dial it down.
Yeah, and just a quick comment on the canned responses. So again, back in my past life of managing the help desk, so we used to use that as a regular thing, that we would get tickets from our level 1 to our level 2 with barely any information in them. And we would use a canned response with all the questions asked of that particular type. But now with the tool, the capability is there, like Shiraz had showed you, that you can just put a template right in on the initial part of the ticket, and that way you can use canned responses for consistent responses of things, language and so on, but you've got the questions up front. So you limit those interactions, and then the canned response will be there specifically for the, hi, sir or madam, can you please supply that, like something outside of what the template would provide you in the beginning.
Yep.
Yeah, here you can see like that right to left rule, right? Because it starts on the left and starts escalating to the right, and the right says, no, I'm going to escalate it back down to you guys, and I need you. From level 2, we're going to ask you some things that go back to level 1, right? And then, again, build that out. We can assist in a lot of use cases like that as well. We've been doing this a while, so but these things are very, very easy to configure. It's all done here in the portal itself. Make sense?
Yep. Yeah,
all
I
right,
like
let's
that
dive in.
Feature.
Yeah, it's a big time saver for sure. I mean, anybody, if we kind of make the joke, if you type something 100 times a day, stop. Just type it one more time, save it as a canned response, and just make that problem go away, right? Forever and ever and ever.
Yep, that's 2 clicks instead of 100 words or something.
And we get so used to it. I mean, that's part of the problem too, is we really get stuck in our ways. We get super efficient at doing things a certain way. And people are always fearful of change, right? That goes back time immemorial. But the idea there is if it's a positive change, if it's something that logically makes sense to people, if it's something that's a change that's not just one person making a change, but it's kind of aligned properly with all of the other initiatives of the service desk and all these different departments get to use that feature and use it differently, right? The way that facilities would use that feature could potentially be very different from the way IT would use it. Or even within IT, somebody from desktop support using that feature might look completely different from somebody in data center support, right? Because the questions that they ask are going to be so different, or the escalation path is so different. So the idea with a proper service desk solution, it should really operate as a platform to execute policy. And we don't care what that policy is. The solution should be adaptable enough to really accommodate a large variety of policies and simultaneously do different types of policies for these different departments. We'll look at that a little bit too when we start talking about workflows. But that gives you, a peek behind the curtain on some of the philosophy behind how we design this stuff. Because really, when it comes down to it, you start looking at all these different service desk solutions. 90% the core feature set is going to be identical from one solution to the next, which is kind of, once makes you want to rip your hair out, because it's like, well, how do I judge which system is best for me? They all do basically the same thing in terms of core feature set. Well, the differences you start to notice are these nuances. It's the thinking of how people utilize the software that can be very, very different from one vendor to the next, or the specific types of problems that the solution is aimed at solving. That can be very different from one vendor to the next. Those are things to keep an eye on. But here's, again, another great example of that, the Manager tab. This, just like we did the My Work tab earlier, where it kind of consolidates everything down into something that's simplistic, it's the same thing for the Manager tab. This only shows up for people who are marked as managers in the solution. In this case, I'm logged in as Terry. He is a manager of a couple of different departments in the system. And like I said earlier, we have a number of auto routing mechanisms in place for, just a ticket comes in, it meets certain criteria, boom, it goes off to John and Susan because they're the ones that always handle that, right? But the idea here is sometimes some groups may have manual assignments required. Okay, fair enough. We want to put those in the hands of a manager who can review those requests and then appropriately kind of behave as the dispatcher, make sure it goes to the right either individual or team. And that's the idea here. So Terry can see the individuals he manages. There's 6 or 7 in the list there, including himself, which is probably ripping a hole in reality somewhere. But the idea here, he could see Martin's got 7 requests and 7 requests that are open, that are waiting for him. So looks like he's, pretty heads down right now. Same with Sergio. He's got, 11 there. Oh, James, he's, getting kind of overwhelmed. So I can start to see here as a manager what's going on. Looks like Fede Aguirre, he's got maybe the lowest amount of stuff. So if I needed to hand something off, well, let's see. Can he take that one? Well, no, he can't. So that's another element. We've built in some rules in the background. We know the skill sets of the different technicians and what groups they're in, and we know the requests and how those line up with those different skill sets. It looks like this one, Terry really is the only one that can handle that right now. But if I do one of these other ones, like checking the printer cartridges there, okay, it looks like 3 people can handle that. And again, that could be based on their skill sets. It can be based on their working hours. So if they're able to handle it, but they're not in the office for another half hour, guess what? They're not considered for routing until their shift officially starts. So again, a lot of little things like that we do in the background just to make it easier for the person who's got to deal with this stuff on a daily basis. And I mean, some of our customers, their ticket volume is ridiculous. 100, 200 tickets a day in some cases. So, and a lot of those doing manual assignments. If that process doesn't have some guardrails around it, this thing could get sticky real quick. So again, we do a lot of those things kind of in the background there to kind of help that user in particular, this manager, right? We've got a ton of other pre-built views in the system as well. All these ones here in the request area, unresolved, not assigned, all the different help desks that I have visibility into. I can see all of the requests from all those lists. These are pre-built. There's no configuration necessary. But again, we understand people have unique scenarios that they need to be on the lookout for. So, or sometimes the auditors come in and just say, show me everything VPN related from the last quarter. Okay, sometimes you just need to build that as a view. So we make that process pretty easy as well. Here's one we always joke about, the high priority VIP tickets. Let's look at that one. Hopefully not too many in there. Ooh, 14, that's really not good. And I see a lot of expired SLA clocks, so I'm starting to get anxious already if I'm a manager here in the system. But the idea here, as you guys can probably already tell, if I go into edit mode there, this is all conditional based. Just like we did with the dashboards earlier, you'll see this feature in particular, this kind of like a query builder. You'll see this all throughout our solution when building reports or dashboards or automation rules. The SLAs, for example, can be customized the same way. The approvals engine can utilize the same kind of architecture as well. So the idea here is you set the conditions and the system just follows those rules. So this one's pretty obvious. The customer is in the VIP group in Active Directory or something. The status is in progress, right? And the priority is high, urgent, or critical. Now, I may have tickets from these people that are in low and medium priority. Maybe I have that in a separate view. So the idea here is let's put out the fires and then kind of move on with our day, right? But it's all pretty straightforward. You can see here how those tickets are listed. I can search within that list. I can reorder them based on different criteria. If I need to export this to CSV or something, that's fine too. I can even pick and choose which fields go into the export. So maybe the auditor says, I don't really care about the subject or the SLA times or the ticket number. I don't care about that. I just want to know the affected customer. I want to know when it was closed. I want to know who the agent was. That's really just it. Boom. Great. So now those 3 fields would spit out into a spreadsheet. So very, very easy. This is almost like the third rail of reporting in our system. It's kind of old school, but sometimes it's what's necessary. So that's why we have it in there. Perfect. So let's actually dive into one of the asset management scenarios real quick. So let's say, for example, I've got a user here, Nancy. She's got some devices. So whether I'm in Nancy's profile, which I'm about to go into here, or whether I'm in a ticket, the asset information is always on the right-hand side, just like we saw in the self-service portal when we logged in as Emma. So she was able to pick from a list of assets, right? In this case, Nancy has some associated with her, so I can see those listed here. And a couple of those are workstations, so let's actually pop in there. One of the benefits is we have an agent that we can deploy to workstations, so we can get even more detail on those, and we can actually take some control of the machine, do some real fancy things as well. For example, a remote desktop session. That's built in as a component of our agent. So that's pretty beneficial. Now, in this case, Nancy's not a real person, so if I click this, nothing happens. But in a use case, what would happen is Nancy would be prompted on her screen, and it would say, hey, I'm logged in as Terry. Technically, I'm not Shiraz today. So it would say Terry is attempting to establish a remote connection. Is that okay, or do you want to cancel? So obviously, if she clicks cancel, it would tell me, and we'd go about our day. But if she clicks OK, awesome, thumbs up. Now we do what is essentially at its core a VNC session, but we've wrapped it up in some security mechanisms and some performance enhancers, so it's a little snappier and a little safer than a traditional VNC session, but works just as you'd imagine, kind of like a Magic Mouse session. And she'd see all my keystrokes and my mouse moving around on her screen and everything. So that can be really beneficial, in particular for training scenarios. If this is kind of a user error issue that's going on, right? We can train in the moment right there and show this is how you would do it. There's where you would click. All right, now you do it. Now you show me, and I'm going to watch you do it, right? So those types of things can be very beneficial there. And again, it's just a built-in part of the agent. We can always track the hardware information that comes over from the BIOS. So that's going to be pretty accurate, even down to how the RAM is actually allocated on the chipset. That's kind of cool. Network information we get back as well. So if we needed the IP address or MAC address or something, actually, and that reminds me real quick, we can monitor that, so to speak. So let's say, for example, a change happens to the IP address. Maybe it's like a fixed IP machine, and for some reason the IP address changes. We're going to need to know that, right? So we can even build in alarms and alerts so that the technicians are made aware of that through emails from the system and things like that, which is kind of nifty. I think we can even, if I remember correctly, we can even have that create a ticket automatically, because we can have it loop back and send that email to the service desk email address, which is kind of nice. We can track the software information. This comes over from the registry and the app remove programs, so it's going to be, again, pretty accurate as a result of that. We will also allow for the creation of different lists in the system, so white lists and black lists and watch lists. You could set up automations in the solution where it can attempt to uninstall blacklisted software every day at 4 p.m. or something like that, so you can make sure that there's no nefarious actors there within the network. That's okay. We always track that. We do software license management as well. So from a reporting standpoint and making sure that you're within your license allocations and things like that, we have built-in reports for all of that as well. And again, built-in alarms and alerts if things are not kosher. We will notify the administration accordingly. And then we also do usage metering. This is kind of nifty as well. So we know how frequently applications are being used. This is actually a really good time of year to talk about that use case. For example, for licenses that an organization might own that might be annually renewed, right? And it's January 1st is fast approaching, so people are trying to figure out and scramble, well, what do we need to renew? What do we not need to renew? First of all, we do all the financial tracking and everything. You might notice financials here. So we do track expiration dates and things of that nature. But in terms of software, not just hardware expirations, but software expirations, we can track how frequently those applications are being used. So for example, if you own 10 licenses of product XYZ, and finance is coming to you and saying, well, renewal's coming, what do we need to do? You run a usage report real quick, and maybe you see that only 8 of those licenses are being consumed for the past 6 months. Okay, fair enough. Just renew 8, don't renew the full 10. You do that a couple of times, this thing starts to pay for itself pretty darn quickly. Or another scenario that comes up with license allocations is a reallocation. So maybe Susan comes in and says, hey, I need some Adobe Creative Suite stuff we're doing our end of the year party. We need to do all of our banners. We're inviting clients. It's got to look really good, all this stuff. Okay, great. And then you go and you look and you say, oh no, we're maxed out. We're using all 10 of 10. Well, before you buy new software and a new subscription, do a usage report. And if you see that people aren't utilizing it, then you can just reallocate one of those licenses away from somebody who wasn't using it to Susan, who needs it right now, right? And just send an email to them saying, hey, you're not using it right now. Susan needs it for the next 3 weeks or whatever, and we'll give it back to you afterwards, whatever. But again, you start doing those things, you start running into those scenarios where you can save quite a bit of money in terms of those software allocations in renewals. This stuff really starts to pay for itself very, very quickly with those scenarios. We will track storage as well. In this case, I'm breaching my my threshold. So that's why it's red. So you can set custom thresholds and, again, alarms and alerts around this stuff. In this case, I think I had it at 20%. Because I know typically that's when behavior on a workstation starts to go a little wonky, is when it's under that 20% threshold. So I want to get notified about that stuff and maybe play Smokey the Bear a little bit. OS details we grab as well. It's worth noting our agent is cross-platform. So we have a Windows agent, we have a Linux agent, we have a Mac agent as well. So if people have Macs and Linux workstations out there, that's okay. The only difference with the Linux workstation, the remote desktop capability is not there. The software management isn't there in the same way. But other than that, again, it's pretty darn similar. Relationship tracking, we can do that too. Here looks like there's a Linksys router that's associated with this machine. So if we wanted to map some basic relationships, we can do that as well. Maybe the monitor and the keyboard that's associated with this thing, or some departmental printer that is on the same hub or something. Who knows? Again, it's up to the organization to map that, but it's pretty easy to do. And then the financials we can do as well. So we know depreciation rates, we know expiration dates, we know when it was purchased, we know the cost center it's associated with. So from an accounting standpoint, from a finance standpoint, we have those data records in here. It makes reporting and reconciliation very, very friendly every quarter, or, again, end of the year here, whatever the time scales might be. Very, very easy to do that. But yeah, that's the case there. Now, obviously, for like network scan devices like this printer and things like that, there's no hard drive on that thing, so to speak. So the idea of the information is going to look a little different. There's not going to be a software tab and things like that. But again, summary, financials, relationships, and then any hardware information we picked up from the SNMP scan in this case would show here as well. So a lot of different options there, fully integrated into the service desk, so that me as a technician putting out fires all day, I have access to that quickly from the user or from the ticket. I can remote into their workstation, help them solve that thing, solve the ticket, and kind of move on with my day. So a lot of different outcomes there that we can accommodate. Any questions about any of that before we dive into workflows and automations for the last few minutes here?
No.
I'm good.
No, I think I'm good, yeah.
All right, fair enough. Well, let's take a walk on the wild side here. Let's actually get under the hood and start looking at some of the components here that really set InvGate apart. So a lot of the things I've talked about today is a lot of the stuff you can do, not necessarily stuff you have to do. In particular, stuff you have to do on day one. Some of this stuff maybe you're doing on day 101. And again, we understand that. But the idea here is, how do these solutions stay in place for many, many, many years, right? And the idea there is scalability and that user adoption we talked about at the beginning. And in my opinion, personally, nothing really reflects that better than the workflows builder. This is probably one of the most advanced components of our solution, and it's typically something you don't even see in a mid-market product like InvGate. This is something typically you've got to look at Remedy or ServiceNow or Sherwell, or one of those six-figure purchases and 6 months to deploy, put people up at the Hilton to come and help you do it. That's typically where you see these kind of graphical workflow designers. You don't normally see them in our space, so it's one thing that we do like to show off a little bit. And one case here, I'm just going to take a look at this one. This is that change request, the cab request we looked at a little bit earlier. This is where I actually built it out in the solution. So it's a graphical workflow designer. I can move this stuff around. I can add my stages so that it adheres with my policy and everything. In this case, if we just kind of look at it from a bird's eye view, somebody initiates the change request. They're going to fill out a form to do that. We'll look at that form in a moment. We then send that off to our change manager. And they're basically like the gatekeeper in this scenario, because if they don't like it and they reject that change request, guess what? We then end the ticket. So it kind of dies on the vine there, right? Or alternately, let's say they do approve it. Okay, great. Then we're considered for our second round of approval, which is the cab. And then they get their democratic process, or their last right of refusal, whatever. But that's the idea there. They get to kind of weigh in on what their desired outcome would be. And again, if they reject it, fair enough, we're going to end the request. If they accept it, okay, good. We go into testing and implementation and so forth. And again, we can move this stuff around and add things in that kind of mesh with our our designer. But the idea is not just to use the design tab, but to go over here to the configuration tab, because this is where we do all of the under the hood configuration for this workflow. So you'll notice here, start, that was the form. This is where I build the form that DevOps will be handling when it comes in. And here it is, the date of the request to change, the assets that are affected, the departments that are affected. I need to upload a file called change plan, all right? So this is where I built all that stuff. Now, again, this is kind of more of a policy and process thing. The one I'm looking at here is kind of vanilla, very, very generic for, demonstration purposes. We know full well everybody has their own, kernel standards there, 10 original herbs and spices or whatever. So that's the idea. You bake that stuff in to your forms. And then the second condition here was the change manager approval. In this case, that's a specific user. We know who our change manager is, right? But it might be one of these other elements that I talked about. Maybe it's the customer's manager from AD, or it's these group-based dynamics. Again, all that stuff is doable there. In this case, it's just a specific user. It's Daniela. She's our change manager here. All right. And we can do, expirations on there and things like that. So these things don't sit out there in limbo forever and ever and ever. And then I can also pick which fields are visible. Maybe it's not the full set of fields that go to the change manager. Maybe it's just the first initial set of fields. That's because she's our gatekeeper, right? She doesn't have to have all the answers, but she has to know if this fits into the change calendar, right? So that kind of stuff we can do, and then we would pass it off based on the conditional outcome. In this case, I only had 2 paths, right? Accept or reject. We'll look at another one in a moment that's like a bowl of spaghetti with 50 different outcomes there. But this one we kept pretty pedestrian. Change manager approval was rejected. Great. Wouldn't you know it, it's that same query builder we saw already a couple of times today. Now, in this case, it's not based on the broader fields from the solution. It's based on the workflow fields, because this one is set to be hyper-surgical. That's the idea with these things. They've got to kind of stay within the rules, because this is something maybe that's, in the case of one of ours that I'll show you in a minute, was collectively bargained with state agencies, workers union. So they can't change that stuff. It's got to play by the rules, right? So that's the idea with these things. This is where you can really affect policy to a great degree. And in that case too, multiple departments might be involved. Here's one we have for onboarding a new hire. So HR is going to kick that one off. They're going to be involved along the way. Here you see. So they'll start it. They'll fill out a form. We'll put that in front of the hiring manager to double check that everything is kosher on there. Because again, if there's a typo in the salary field or something like that, that's going to cause problems later. The next stage after that gets approved, we push that information using our API. We're going to push that form into our HR system. So we darn well want to make sure that, that data is right before it gets to that point. I even have a jump back stage. So if it gets rejected, we send it back to the form filler to double check it, basically, right? Again, little safety nets like that can go a long way and save a lot of sleepless nights for people. And then it comes through, IT comes in, they get the AD entry. At the end there, facilities gets the office going. That's pretty straightforward. We've all been in a scenario like this, right? But again, from a configuration standpoint, the idea here is some of this stuff is okay. Here in the start phase, we probably have things like, salary number, things like that, which is perfectly okay for HR to see. And definitely we would want to push that into our HR system. But HR is not going to be okay with IT seeing that halfway down the road there. So we can actually pick and choose which of these fields are visible at each stage. So in the case of the AD entry, they probably just need the first name and last name. That's the only things we would make visible to them at that stage. The rest of the stuff would be potentially hidden, because number one, it's sensitive. Number two, it's probably just irrelevant for the task at hand for that user or group of users. So again, that's the idea there. And then at the end there, facilities, getting the office configured, really they probably just need the start date. The rest of the stuff they could care less. They need to know when that person is starting, because they got to physically go over there and make sure everything is good to go for the office. So that's the idea with this stuff. Again, you can get very, very technical, and these ones that I've looked at so far are pretty basic, but here's that one that we built out for the state agency. God love them. They had this on paper, which helped us, I guess. But it was like blueprint paper rolled out across their conference room table as they were telling us how they do their recruiting. This is their recruiting process. This is not their onboarding process. They had a whole other workflow for that. This is just when they want to hire somebody, because they have their internal audit there where they have to double check, is there somebody, current union employee, somebody who can handle that work internally. They've got to basically get the first right to that position. And if they pass on it, then we start getting into the weeds on the other stuff. And they had, once it made it through that first barrier, then they had like 3 rounds of copywriting for the job posting sites. And they had like their internal requirements meetings and all that stuff. And then here's the interviews. They had like 3 rounds of interviews. And they had little safety nets in there too. Like if the second interviewer didn't get at least 3 references, it wouldn't go to the third interview. So it would jump back and say, no, you need to get that third reference or whatever. So that was the idea there. Now they had it on paper, and it was like 90 something stages on paper. They talked us through it. We helped them over several sessions. It was probably like 6 or 7 hours. We carved it up into, I think, like 5 sessions maybe. And we helped them build it out. And they were able to get it down to like 60 something stages in here because we were able to consolidate a lot of stuff into single stages, which was kind of beneficial. Now, again, hopefully customers are never going to have workflows that are this complex or, whatever the case might be there. But in the cases that they do, or as things kind of scale and change, again, it's kind of hard to outgrow a system that's capable of doing these types of interaction points for people. So that's the idea with this stuff. And really, you can use this for all different kinds of things. Jason and I, we felt bad for this guy. We had a guy, he was demoing on his own before he had a chance to talk with us. And he built, it's this one here. He built out location-based routing, not realizing that that's an out-of-the-box feature that we have. So he built his own location-based routing. He spent maybe 2 hours. I guess, he got a kick out of it because he got to really learn the system, right? But, yeah, here you go. The Allentown versus Chino versus Daytona, these all went to different, groups or whatever. We were really impressed, actually, weren't we? He showed this to us, and it was like, oh, wow, man. It's like your fastest learner of workflows ever.
Is that kind of like a dynamic workflow that he tried to make?
That's exactly what it was. So what it was, he hadn't built out all of his different groups and catalog entries and everything. So like he had just kind of one default group in there. He didn't have all of his groups already set up, and he didn't really have a service catalog set up. He just went right to workflows and started working out of that. Because if he had gone in and started creating the different catalog entries and he could go in there and build his own rules if he wanted to. And then he could create, using that same conditional builder, he could say, if the location is X, send this to Y. He could have done that here without having to build in the really complex workflow. But again, it shows that you can use this to do quite a bit.
Yeah, like Shiraz is saying, we've got both. Actually, in this case, we have both category-based routing, additional routing, and we have escalation routing. So based on certain conditions, you can have that one team, but if you've got multiple sites, you can say, well, if the customer is from this site, escalate to the technician who's at that site, as opposed to just a general help desk technician.
Mm-hmm. So basically, you can have different processes under each service request or something.
You could.
Yeah.
And you can build in those additional safety nets like the VIP fault request, right? So like whatever our standard rule is, it goes out the window sometimes, and that's okay. You can build in automations just for that. So in this case, if somebody's from the VIP group and they've got specifically like a hardware issue, right? This isn't going to happen if they're asking for time off or whatever. But if it's an IT issue and it's a VIP, you can see down here, we automatically escalate that to high priority, and we just send it to John Thomas.
Yeah.
We don't even bother with any kind of group-based stuff. It just goes to John.
Go straight to John. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and with the example that I was mentioning, The example I was mentioning, I've got one customer who it's a school district, and they've got 58 different locations, so 58 different school sites, and they've got a technician at each site. So he did that. He said, the customer is from this location. I have a technician there, and he has that one big gigantic pool of technicians, each depending on where the customer is from, and we're pulling all those different criteria from Active Directory. So based on that, send it to that person, but upon escalation at the district site like they have, sometimes, well, this person only deals with that department as opposed to, so either department-based routing from the conditional builder, and then so you can get very, very specific as to where it goes and who it goes to on certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get super fancy on these things. I mean, and again, these aren't things that a lot of people are typically doing on day one. This is something they're doing 3 months, 6 months, a year in. As like, this is a great example. Sometimes you don't even know you need this rule until there's a fire that comes up and something goes horribly wrong and management's all over you like, hey, what are we going to do about this? And you just kind of have to pump the brakes and say, hey, let us deal with this first. Let us get it done. And then let's do like a whiteboarding session tomorrow or whatever. Let's figure out how to make sure these things don't happen again in the future. That's a perfect scenario for that. You get it done. You get in front of the whiteboard and you say, what were the things we should have been looking at? What were the things we should have known better, right? That should have caught our attention right away. You start listing those things out. You just bake those in as your conditions. And then you say, well, how did we fix it? What would be the best way to do that to make sure things don't completely go off the rails next time? Great, let's just send it to John, right?
Yep.
So again, some of those things, you don't even know you need the rule until something's gone wrong. So the ability to really quickly make those adaptations and changes in the solution, again, without having to like fly somebody out to code it for you. If you can do it right here in the portal, that's a win for everybody.
Yep, makes sense.
But I think we still have reports to look at. Are there any other kind of use cases? I know we're running a little over on time today, but are there any other use cases that you think would be really important for today besides reports?
Not that I can think of. No.
I mean, we could spend the next 6 hours still not cover all the capabilities. So I'm trying to make sure we stick to the things that I think people find most effective early on, and kind of see the vision a little bit there too. But so let's dive into reports then.
Okay.
So again, just like dashboards, just like the My Work view and the manager view and whatever, we build in a lot of kind of defaults for the solution. So there's a lot of baked in reporting in the solution. But I want to actually go through the custom report builder because it's pretty friendly actually. So if I come in here to create a new report, it's all drag and drop reporting and it's color coded to make it a little bit easier to learn. This way people don't need like a PhD in crystal reports to get through all this stuff. But it's pretty straightforward. You can see drag your measures here and I see measures here and this stuff's all green. So maybe I drag it over there, right? It's again, and we'll help everybody build out the first few reports. It's, a nice little component there with some of the training videos we have and even onboarding services we can offer and things like that as well. But that's the idea here. Drag in your requests. Great. I see I've got 1,087 requests. That's some good data set. So at least I know I'm not working with like 5 tickets here. But I probably want to measure some other things. So here's one I used to run kind of back in my consulting days. I would help people find the right solutions and help them figure out whether their policies were spot on or not. And a lot of times people would be new to SLAs and they weren't really sure what our SLAs should look like, right? They could read a book about SLAs, but that doesn't always tell the full story. So I would have them run a report, something like this. I would say, okay, we're like 30 days in. What I want to show is our customer satisfaction rating, because I would kind of dictate that as the external measure of success. So this tells us how well we're doing in the eyes of the customer. And that's pretty good. 4.3 out of 5 stars, that's good. But I want to weigh that against my internal measure of success, which is probably going to be my resolution percentage. So this tells me how much of my cushion is left, or if we had no cushion left. In this case, we do. We have about 1/3 of our cushion left. So this is pretty good. This tells me kind of at a high level with a decent data set, we're pretty much doing what I would think. But what I want to do now is start to parse the data a little further because, for example, I want to see my different request types. Change requests, they should be measured differently from incidents and problems. It's just good policy. Plus, I want to see there if there's any, deltas that aren't making sense. And so far, it's about what I would expect there. Service requests are taking a little long. Questions are taking a little longer, but that's okay. Again, I still have some cushion left. Now, maybe I want to do priority as another wrinkle to throw in there. Because if I see that my team is sandbagging it and they're like crushing it on low and medium priority, but dropping the ball everywhere else, and they're padding the stats, which apparently they're doing here, but it's only 2 tickets. I don't want to eat their lunch for that just yet. I can see, again, it's not really, I don't like that there, but it's only a couple of requests. But that's the idea. I can start to see if there's any real obvious outliers. And then maybe too, I probably want to start picking on some people. So let me get my agents here. Now this thing is going to go sideways on me, so let me enlarge it. Let's look at Terry, since he's the jack of all trades in my environment here. So his chart, I'm looking at his column there. I start to peel down. I see that's not good. 3.5 stars. He was fast. But again, it's only 5 requests, so let me continue down. And this is looking pretty good overall. By the looks of it, ooh, that's not good, 100%. But he did get a 5-star rating. So that's a scenario we would see. Back in my consulting time, I would see people would see a lot of this. They'd be getting 5-star ratings, but 100% breaches, and they'd start yelling at their text. And I'd say, hey, pump the brakes there. The customers are telling you the text did a good job. What we're saying is, if I'm seeing this across multiple people, that's not a problem with the agents. We were too ambitious. We gave them a target that was not really achievable in terms of their SLA times. What we need to do is loosen the tie a little bit there. Take it down 20%, 25%. Let's run this report again in a week and see if anything different shakes out, right? So again, that was one of our real obvious outliers. If I was seeing this across multiple people, okay, fair enough. In this case, I'm not. In this case, it looks like Terry was just really slow on this one for some reason. It's only 2 requests, but still, I can click on that, and I could see down here those 2 requests. In this case, are in Spanish. But the issue there, maybe they were like VPN items or something. Terry's not normally the VPN guy. He hasn't done that in years, so he's a little slower on it. John usually handles it. He's out of the office today, so Terry's picking up the slack and trying to help out a little bit. And the customer said, yeah, he was really nice. I liked working with him. He's just slow with it. Okay, fair enough. We can see that here. So based on how much work I have in Terry's column here, maybe we make somebody else the backup on those things going forward. Again, now that's a data-driven decision instead of something that's kind of gut feel or just our hair's on fire and we're looking for the first thing to make a change. Let's take a more measured approach to it, look at the data, and let that data help us make those decisions instead, right? That's the idea with these things. Now, any of these reports, you can create the custom reports here. You can save it so you can run it whenever the heck you want. And then also your saved reports can be scheduled. So for example, here I've got KPI for manager. That's probably one that needs to go out, frequently, right? So maybe I schedule that. I click scheduled there. Who are the users that are going to get it? Again, it can be end users like Daniela and Emma, our end users from earlier. Again, they can receive that stuff as well. And then, like I said, we can say, maybe it's every 2 weeks or something like that. And they've told us specifically what they want on there. And it's not these 15 different things, just like we did with the list view earlier. Maybe it's just a handful of things they want to see. All right, fair enough. It's really not that hard to do. And then this would just go out on that scheduled basis that we've assigned for the request, for the tickets, I should say, the reports. Now, again, each different report in the system can be scheduled to go out on its own time scale. So if there's things that go out, there's 5 or 6 reports that go out on like the first Tuesday of every month. Okay, fair enough. That's not hard at all to set up. Name them appropriately, do all that fun stuff. New reports, easy to create. Reports based on our different requests that we have, on the SLAs that we have, on the services that we offer. These are all built-in reports. There's nothing really you have to do other than supply it with your group dynamics and things like that. And this is all in the system, out of the box. Very, very easy to start utilizing right away. But yeah, so I would call that the nickel tour of of service desk and a little bit of assets there too. But any other scenarios you guys can think of for today before we kind of close up shop?
I think they were looking at like asset management. I think we've covered that already. That was the main.
They did ask just to see how to manage a call. Can you just set up a ticket from new, just so that they can see that?
Like a phone-in scenario kind of a thing?
Yeah, like say a end user, a customer coming in, making a ticket, and then a technician seeing it.
Yeah, so we can do that a couple of ways. If we do it from the self-service portal, we could do it that way. A phone-in would be really easy. I just look for the user. So Nancy calls me and says, hey, I need help. Okay, Nancy, here you are. Let me find you. Fair enough. I'll create a ticket on your behalf. That's pretty easy too, right? So, and then let's do the toner one. That was the one we did earlier, I think, right? So she's got that toner problem. Okay, fair enough. Now you see I can select the priority because I'm an agent, where she couldn't. And even then, I don't give full access to the full priority list. Even now, I'm just saying, okay, low or medium. But that's kind of cool too, right? So I could say it's in progress. She's in building 1. It's impacting her department, and it's pretty urgent. And I would say Nancy is out of toner and has a project due today. Okay, great. Next to the break room. It's not making any noises. She needs black, yellow, blue, and red. She needs it all. And she's in the marketing department. Great. Fair enough. Do I want to link any assets? Let's do that. Maybe it's this Epson printer. And I should be good to go to submit that now. There it is. And it looks like Terry is the lucky guy. He's the one that was assigned as the agent on that too.
Does she get an automatic email then?
Yeah, that's actually up to the customer. We have a number of, I don't know, there's like 40 something email templates baked into the solution. So it's just a matter of which ones are turned on, because some customers don't want, tons of emails going out. Others do. They want like full visibility into all that stuff, right? So we have templates for all that. If you're added as a customer on something, or like you need to approve something, right? There's a built-in default template. Certainly, we allow people to customize that if they want to, but again, there's stuff in there just kind of out of the box. It's just a matter of if that specific one is turned on or off. In this case, I have most of them turned on.
Okay, cool.
Same thing if there's a new answer or a new comment or something like that. Here's a new request created where you're the customer. This is the template for that one, right? Shows you the description and all that stuff. Now, obviously, these little blue tokens, those are the variables. They're kind of like little placeholders, and we will inject the value from the request into that placeholder so that it makes sense when it goes to the user. And this can even be the custom fields in the system. Make sense?
Yep.
Now, if I go to the My Work area, I should see 4 items. There you go. There was 3 earlier, right? And here's that one. Nancy is out of toner. Now, again, I can go in and add reminders, add tasks, do approvals, reassign, da-da-da-da-da. Or maybe I just need to solve it. And I could say, I have replaced the toner. Everything is working great. Perfect. Now, I can reply with that solution. Now, I've even got solution confirmation turned on. So Nancy, in this case, would be notified by email. Terry has solved your request. Here it is. Do you accept or reject that solution? If she rejects the solution, it reopens the ticket and notifies Terry. If she accepts the solution, it closes the ticket. Everybody moves on with their day. That's great. We also have a timeout that you can put on there so that thing's not sitting out there just gathering dust. You might put 48 hours or something like that. Give the user a chance, but sooner or later we need to just close that ticket and move on, right? So those are all options as well. You can disable this if you want to. In this case, I think it's good policy, so I've left it on in my demo environment.
Okay, and something about that, what people always ask, can you report on the time it's taken people to respond on tickets?
Absolutely. We track that by default. So that's certainly something that's reportable. We also have, and you guys will get a kick out of this because we've been using this one for years, we also have a time-lapse view that kind of shrinks down all the data from the request. In this case, over the last 5.3 years, that's maybe a little obscene, but it shows, you know, how long it was waiting and who it went to, and it kind of changed hands a few times here, right? So we can see all of that. I can also do not just total time, but maybe our working hours. So maybe if I cut out nights and weekends, it's not quite so bad. 4.6 years. But yes, that's the idea with this. You can see through reports, through dashboards, you can certainly see that. We even give you this snippet kind of time lapse view as well, right within the request. You can take a screenshot of this and send this right off to that person if they need.
Okay, cool.
If they really felt ambitious, they could go down here into the audit trail and really get nitty gritty. They could even see, like, you know, show me everything that was waiting for approval versus waiting for agent versus waiting for the customer. I mean, it's all there. It's really just, we kind of make a joke about it. It's like dashboards without decisions or just decoration, right? And that's kind of the idea here too. It's really not necessarily about what you want to see, because we could show it to you. It's what do you want to do next with it? Once you know these things, what are you going to do next? Because that would impact how we would tell you to look for it or where we would say to build that report. It's really about what you do with it next. There's usually 6 different ways to do something in our solution. There's no right or wrong way. It's going to be something that aligns with policy when we can manage it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good.